Known as faux rock for his ferocious hitting style, David Fulcher spent 8 years brightly in the spotlight of the NFL. We embrace them, cheer for them. They are heroes in our eyes. Yet when their time in the spotlight ends, many go on to do the most important work of their lives. They go into overtime. Welcome to Overtime, life after the spotlight with NFL All-Pro David Fulcher and his co-host, national award-winning speaker David Coleman, exclusively on the Bootleggers Music Group Radio.
Good morning, guys. Welcome to another episode of Overtime, life after the spotlight. David Fulcher here with my co-host, David Coleman. How you doing, brother?
Good morning, David Fulcher. We had the weekend of a lifetime. It's good to see you again. Man, what a busy weekend.
I tell you what, man, it all started, man, with my surprise 60th birthday on Friday.
You old man.
Some of my Arizona State colleagues and fans of ASU coming down here to see ASU and UC football game. And then Sunday, what did I do Sunday? Oh, I was on the radio, had a football game to watch. Bengals went down to Cleveland and took care of business. But that's not about me today. It's about my guest here, longtime Channel 5 broadcaster, sports guy, George Vogel. Good morning, George. How you doing, my friend?
David, good morning and happy birthday, my man. Happy belated birthday.
Thank you, my friend. It is great to have you on, man. And Overtime, life after the spotlight. We've both been through it in the spotlight, past the overtime, and I'm going to pass it on to David Coleman because he's got a few questions, and let's get this thing rolling.
George, I'm ready to rock.
It's wonderful to meet you, George, and I feel connected to you even though we've only met today for the first time. After my master's at Bowling Green in '85, I took a job at Xavier and I came down, and it wasn't long after that I kind of started that career and a speaking career in 1987. And I feel like I grew up with you. I feel like I grew up, and I was telling David before the program, I have a personal Mount Rushmore of local sports reporting and broadcasting greatness. And it's you, John Popovich, Ken Brew, and Denny Jansen. I feel like
God bless you.
And what I loved about this, and it's so nice to have you on the program. David and I were talking about this before the show began. It never felt like you ever read a teleprompter. It just felt like you were sitting, having a conversation with me, and you would effortlessly flow from whatever the local pro sport was, what happened in college, and then in Cincinnati, you better cover high school sports or they will run you out of town. But we loved how effortless you made it look.
Well, I was lucky because early in my career, I had different people around me who kind of taught that skill or secret or whatever it is to, they would have it. It's funny you ask that or say that because they would have me very early in my career. We had these coaches and they were terrific. And, sometimes you go into it and you're like, come on, what can they tell me about this? Or what can they tell? They could tell me a lot. And it was about communicating and the visual aspect of it. And they would make me watch shows and I would have to just watch my face and know whether I'm talking about something happy, sad, exciting, whatever. You're supposed to bring all that out and yes, not be married so much to the teleprompter, even though you kind of were, but write conversationally, speak conversationally, just like we're doing here. Right. That's exactly what and so that was easy to me. It's like, hey, people have been telling me to shut up my whole life because I talk too much. So just talking was easy, right?
George, did you go to school for broadcasting?
Yeah, I went to UC, and quite honestly, David, I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do. I was more interested in the production of it and the production of live sports and, whether you're a director, producer, whatever, just making that happen. And it always fascinated me. I would, when I was in college, I'd go to the football games and sometimes be in the press box working for the student radio station. And then I'd see all this stuff going on to get this game on the air. And they didn't air a lot of UC games back then. But when they did, it's like, this is really cool. They got this big production truck and they're working out of that. And so I became interested in that aspect and worked behind the scenes at WLWT for 4 or 5 years. And then I found out the harsh reality, which is there's not a lot of those jobs putting those live sporting events. There are, as far as running the cameras and stuff, but you got one guy in charge. So it's a tough path to get to. And so I was kind of bumping my head up against stuff financially as far as what you would be getting paid. And I went to them and I said, hey, what can I, I'm thinking about changing careers and going somewhere else and just finding an avenue where I can make some more money. And I got a young family. And they're like, well, let's try this high school sports reporting thing. And I'm like, oh boy, this is not going to go well. So I made a deal. I would go into the sales department if I didn't make it as a reporter. And they're like, yeah, we'll do that. We'll give you, you can go into sales, but first try this. I tried that. For some reason, they liked it. And then they coached me up and it worked out. It was just kind of like right spot, right time. And that's how it is in a lot of things in life. You just happen to be in the right spot at the right time. And something you never know what life's going to give you. You don't.
Yeah.
George, in a way, you just led me right in thank you for the great segue as a pro giving me my segue. But later in the program, David's going to ask you about your faith, Faith. But I'm asking you right now about fate. You came along at a time here. You break in, you say, I'll go work in the office or I'm going to be on air. You came along at a time where right after you start, David's Bengals go to the Super Bowl. The Reds, wire to wire in 90. I was at one of those games going crazy. UC goes to the Final Four. You came along at a time when arguably some of the top memories in Cincinnati sports history were yours to cover.
It was crazy. And you know what? I kind of give that kind of credit for helping me because all of that was a big deal and it all got a lot of attention in town. And the more people saw me, the more they got used to, my Southern Ohio accent that may not be so prevalent in Cincinnati, but it was out where I grew up. They kind of got a chance to get used to me in a hurry because their sports was taking center stage. And you're right. And it wasn't, it was the teams and then it was also the personalities. And David, you guys had a team full of personalities. Starting with Sam Weish. And then, at UC, you got Bob Huggins, you had Pete Gillen over at Xavier, Marge and Pete with the Reds, and then Lou. And I mean, you had all these characters that made our job easy. There was back in that day, one of those people would say something crazy every week. There was a story, a controversy, something to cover because there was always somebody saying something. Whether it was Sam, whether it was Lewis Billups, there were characters around every corner in Cincinnati sports in those days, and it made it fun, exciting, and actually successful too. Yeah. And then after that 1992 Final Four, we went forever without it. I mean, the Reds did make the playoffs in 95, but there were no more big events, no Super Bowls, no Final Fours, no World Series. And I'm like, oh my gosh, in the first 4 or 5 years of my reporting career, I got to do all this stuff. And now the next 25, I'm not doing anything. I'm sitting, there's no big events. But it was a great way to break in and a great time to break in. And I think that's part of what helped me with longevity was that, everything started with such a big bang. It was like, you couldn't go wrong. I mean, it was shooting fish in a barrel back then.
So let's go back because you mentioned a lot of names and you probably have interviewed and had conversations with some great people outside of David Fulcher. Give me 5 guys, women, men, no matter, sports figures that you have interviewed that you would probably have a top 5 list of people that you have talked to, interviewed, sat down and had a conversation with. Throw me 5 names out there if you got one.
Okay, I'll start with Paul Brown. I will start with Paul Brown, and growing up, if you grew up in Ohio and you followed any football at all, Paul Brown, obviously a legend to everyone.
Oh yeah,
and I got to sit down with him probably in 1988 or so, 88 or 9, down at Riverfront Stadium. We were sitting in the lower level, and I had a great, I mean, probably talked to him for an hour, and he told me things that I'd never heard, and just very interesting things, and just how connected he was to high school sports still too. He still paid attention to it. It was so funny. We'd be at Spinney Field, and he would ask us who's going to win the Madeira game this week and things like that, asking us about the high school football scene. It was so funny. So I would have to put him up there. Then after that, and it's funny, because I still cherish interviews with like Pete Gillen and Sam.
Right.
And one time we go up to Sam's house for an interview, and I forget what was going on. He's got all these boxes of Army surplus underwear that he's going to give to the homeless shelter.
Yes.
He did stuff like that all the time that nobody knew.
Yes, he did.
His living room stacked full of boxes, and it's underwear that he's going to take. So I mean,
what's funny? Hey, George, you know what's funny, man, is I remember that because Sam had Boomer, Crummy, myself, Brooks, Collinsworth come to his house and put those underwear in our car to take them to the homeless downtown Cincinnati.
Oh my God. Yeah, see? What year was that? I mean, that probably was 88, 89.
I think it might have been either our strike year or the year after the Super Bowl. So 87, 88, 89, one of those 3 years. I remember us doing that. And we were like, dude, Sam, we love you, man. You're our coach. But I'm not going to put these 10,000 pair of underwear in my car to go drop them off to homeless downtown. You know what? We did it. We all did it. Yes.
George, you bring up a great memory for me. I worked at Xavier. I was the director of student activities and all the major events for 13 years. I started on the same day as Pete Gillen, and neither one of us had a place to live. So they put us up in the residence halls with apartments next to each other. And we both left on the same day. And I had lunch with him. We had lunch to kind of celebrate that fact. And I said, Pete, how is Xavier going to get on without you? And I'll never forget this. He said, within 24 hours, it'll be Pete Who. And 24 hours later, they hired Skip Prosser, and it was Pete Who. And he taught me a very valuable lesson. And I think David and I think about this. We're only as good as our last show.
Yes.
Only as good as our last effort. And I don't mean to get you off track. So we had Paul Brown. Who's the rest of your top five?
Oh my gosh, to whittle it down to a top five. I mean, you guys are going to laugh at some of this because it's probably, it doesn't mean much to other people, but it kind of does me. And I'll tell you, there's no question I got to throw Pete in there. Mm-hmm. And some of and this was probably more of a downside of an interview, but it was when he was telling us point blank, I did not bet on baseball. And he would sit in his office, and we carried the games back then. WLWT, where I worked, carried the Reds games. So we did a lot of side Red shows and specials and all this. We're interviewing Pete all the time during this stuff. And the whole time, man, he would convince you. You'd walk out of that office and you would be convinced that Pete did not bet on baseball. But yeah, he did. Let's see some other ones. I'll tell you one. Bobby Bonilla in the 1990 playoffs, and so the Reds had control of this series. And I go into the Pirates clubhouse, and I'm supposed to ask someone to come out and be live on our show, and it's like, come on, this isn't going to work. And so it's like, well, there's Bobby Bonilla, there's Barry Bonds. Easy decision. I'll go to Bonilla because Bonds already had his reputation. Sorry about the Arizona State thing, David.
Oh, good.
But Barry already had his reputation. It's like, that guy will bite my head off. I'm going, and Bonilla said yes. And I'll be darned. I told him what time, and I'm like, he'll never show up. And sure enough, he did. Here he comes out of the clubhouse. And that same day, I almost didn't get back into the stadium. And thank God for Marge's shot. I did. Marge, the night before, had been kept out of some area. She was in Pittsburgh for the playoff game, and she forgot a pass or something. It became a big stink. She went to the president of the league, and it was a big media story the next morning. So then I was tasked with getting Marge over to the stadium for an interview on our air. So I go pick her up at a hotel, the old William Penn in downtown Pittsburgh. And she's riding shotgun. I'm driving through rush hour traffic in Pittsburgh. She's got her head out the window, get over, honey, get over, and helping me get back to the stadium. And then we pull up, and I'm like, Mrs. Schott, you go on in. I left my bag in there, my credentials in there. And I knew all this stink had happened the night before. She'd forgotten the credential. And she's like, don't you worry, honey, you're with me. And so I go with her, and she walks into that stadium, and every door's flying open. I don't know what she said to that NL president, but it worked. Because these people were bowing. She took me right out on the field. No credential, anything. I just walked right behind Marge Schott. So yeah, I would say you throw Sam and Pete in there, and then the Bobby Bonilla thing was really cool, and then another fun one, and this was down, and when you think of what the best interviews were and all this, you never know when they're going to happen, and so we were down doing a Bengals post-game show, and Carl Pickens had just set a record and it had all these catches and stuff. He's not even in the locker room yet. And you know Carl, David, back then, when it was good, Carl was around, man.
It was good, yes.
When it wasn't so good, you couldn't find him with a search warrant. So I'm standing there, and the last guy, because you never knew what you're going to get, and you got the team hasn't been able to go in the locker room yet, and he comes flying to us right after the game. What's on? We're live, and he's saying stuff that I cannot believe, but it was great television. It was great television, and he didn't swear. He knew not to do that, but that one was a blast because it was just so unexpected. You're like,
Great.
Half the time you got to beg these guys to do this stuff. And he was flying to that camera like a moth. So that was a good one. And then this one's corny, but it's just any time anyone on a high school football field or basketball court or baseball field or whatever won a big game, and the joy of those kids every single time, because you're watching them, and this is an event they're going to remember the rest of their lives.
Oh, yeah.
The rest of their life, they're going to remember that night on that field. Yes. And they came off with a win, and that was and that's why out of all that stuff, covering those high school sports was so much fun, because there was joy, but I'll tell you what, there was also some real sadness when things didn't go. The emotion was unbelievable with those high school fields, and just, it's that way when you're that age. It's kind of that way every game, but the big games, the championships and all that.
It's so true, raw, and genuine. And by the way, George, you might think that David is the lead host and the star of the show, but Cooper Fulcher, who is now on his lap, his puppy, is the actual star of our show.
Yeah, well, I can see why, and I think Cooper probably runs the show too. I think
let me tell you, he's got that little man syndrome, but man, he stands very, very tall. Trust me.
George, so is he a wiener dog?
He's a wiener dog. Yes, he's a long-haired wiener dog. Yep.
George, can I ask you a non-sports question?
Yeah,
I've wanted to ask someone in the industry this question. Hey, again, I told you who my Mount Rushmore is, and you're right in there. How does the viewing public, how do we choose who we watch on the news every night? There's obviously you and Brew and Jansen, and you're all phenomenal. How did you get your particular following is my first question. And we had Marty Brenneman on the show. He can't even order a pizza from Domino's without the person on the other end going, "Are you Marty Brenneman?" So number one, how do we fans, how do we pick who we're going to watch? And number two, can you go anywhere without someone going, "Hey"?
Oh yeah, I can. It is funny that Marty says that about being on the phone or whatever, because I can walk in like this, I'm fine. Nobody says a word. But when I open my mouth, that's when I get busted. People recognize the voice. I'm in, gosh, which game was I at the other day? It may have been the UC game. I can't remember. But I got in an elevator somewhere, and oh no, I was crossing the bridge. It was the UC game, and there's a gentleman beside me, probably about my age, I don't know. And I just look at my wife. I go, "This was a bad idea coming, trying to get across this bridge." And this guy looks at me. He's like, "Oh, come on, George. It's not that bad." And it's like, how? It's like he had no idea until I opened my damn mouth, and then he had an idea. It's like, so I can, but it's not that bad. Believe me, it's not that bad. And I remember Jerry Springer. I asked him when I worked with him, and we would go about once a week. Maybe he would take the night crew out to have a drink at a bar somewhere, and he would sing with the band if there was a band there and all that. We'd have a good time, but he would be mobbed. He couldn't do anything because he'd been the mayor. He was doing that commentary. He was the biggest thing going in Cincinnati, and he couldn't go anywhere without getting mobbed, having to talk to people. I'm like, Jerry, my God, how do you do it? So he goes, "Oh, I want them to do that, because if they don't do that, and I'm on television and I got a brand I'm set, and they don't do that, I got a problem. I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. So I want them to do that. That tells me I'm doing something right."
Yeah.
So I always remembered that. It's like, yeah, I guess that is how it works. So that, yeah, and I'm nowhere near, what Jerry was back then. I mean, it was like going out to dinner with the Beatles. It was crazy in Cincinnati with Jerry Springer back then when he was doing the news and was on top of the news world. But yeah, and I'm nowhere near that, and I don't get busted all the time or whatever. But it's funny Marty said that about the voice thing, because of course yes, and I get busted on mine. I can go into a bank or wherever where it's quiet, nobody knows a thing till I open my damn mouth, and then somebody might know.
Well, I got one for you, George. As an athlete, I always try to take my game to a different level, and I watch players around the league: the Ronnie Lotts, the Dennis Smiths, the Joey Browners, the Kenny Easleys, those guys that played safety. And I've said, I'm going to make my game some similar to theirs. As a broadcaster, did you have a few people that you said, that guy's pretty good at what he does? Oh, he talks too much, or he doesn't do this. Did you find a niche with somebody to make your game as a broadcaster similar to theirs?
Yes, very. And two of the first I worked with, Bill Brown and Zip Rizeppa. And Zip was like the crazy guy that was, he was the juggler, and he said crazy stuff on the air, and behind the scenes he was kind of disorganized. Everything was last minute. And it was last minute because Zip was always trying to make it better and improve it and tell a better joke. And then you had Bill Brown over here, who would time his scripts. Zip had no idea how long he was going to go. Producers were having to tell him to shut up all the time. Bill Brown would time every script and know exactly that he was going to, if they gave Bill 3 minutes, he did 3 minutes of content, and he did it right, and he was very organized. So I kind of learned from them from the very beginning, and you could take stuff from both of them and try to use, take what works. And then it was just, yes, David, everyone you would watch with that kind of, eye of trying to get a secret or get a, any kind of an idea that would help you. And a lot of it early in my career was all about relaxation too, because man, back then they had those brightest lights in the world, and you're just melting, and you have all this makeup on. And I did melt the first time I was on the air anchoring, or the second time. I ran up a bunch of steps and I start sweating, and it was, oh my God, someone still got that tape, and it was unbelievable. You guys would say, no way they let that man back on television after that show. Seriously, if they would have fired me, I would have gotten it. Like, some guy even wrote a column in the paper about it. It was so funny. So that was a great way to start the career. Like, at least I started with something like that, where it's like, if I can survive that, I can probably survive anything. is how it felt. So yeah, you were constantly looking at guys, whether they're national, local, whatever. And you know, I all the guys I worked with, they all kind of had their own thing, and that's probably what works best. And you know, I wasn't going to be anything but what I am.
You know, Jim, you remind me, I didn't realize it till now. You remind me so much. I used to do, you don't know this, but I'm known as the dating doctor, and I travel the country as a professional public speaker. And I used to do a lot of radio. And for a couple of years with Jim and Randy in the morning, I was on Warm 98 every Wednesday giving relationship advice. And you remind me so much of Jim Smith, who he now lives in Nashville, and he's the voice, literally the voice of Christian radio across this country. But you both have this calm demeanor and this cadence that's fabulous. And I'm going to ask you a quick question that's kind of the basis for this whole show. It's Overtime Life After the Spotlight. Tell us what a day in the life of George Vogel is like now. It looks like, I think you retired, 23? So we're going a year or two now.
Yep.
What's the day in your life now?
Well, it's funny because I felt like when I was in the business, I could never predict what my day is going to be like. Now you would think I could predict what my day is going to be, but it's different every day, which is great because I'm not doing anything regularly. Like I do my own podcast on a Tuesday night with Bearcat Journal. It's mainly about Cincinnati sports and just, you know, we kick some topics around, but everything else, you know, I got 2 grandkids living on the west side of town. So go see them a couple times a week, whenever. I'll call my son, say, hey, you need help today? Because he's generally there. He works overnight. So then he's there in the day. And then, you know, the wife comes home and he can go to bed and get ready. So they kind of got a system, but I'll call him, see if he needs anything and how the kids are doing. Sometimes I take them lunch, do that, golf a lot, run a lot of errands that we need stuff around here. And so it's just when you have relatives around and stuff and family around and they know you're retired, they keep you busy. It's like, oh, Dad can go pick that up tomorrow. He's off. Dad can go do this. And certainly my wife does the same thing. Here's your list today. I'll see you after work because she's still working. And
so you got a whole lot of honeydews going on, right?
So I better do that. Or yeah. You see, there's no curtain behind me now. There probably will be next week at this time. So just stuff like that. The all-around maintenance guy just put, you know, a new doorbell up yesterday. So it's just, I'm cooking now, believe it or not.
Wow.
Not every day, but enough. And I couldn't make popcorn, you know, when I retired. Now I'm pretty damn good. But yeah, I'm not bad. But yeah, it's just a mishmash of anything and everything. And right now I love it. I'm not tired of what I'm doing yet. So
we're happy for you.
And it feels like I'm still trying to figure it all out too. And I don't know if I ever will.
George, I got 2 questions here. I'm gonna ask this first one about I like to dig in on personal with their faith. Has faith in your life, did it play a big part? Is it still in your life, or was it never in your life?
I would say it has, and I'll tell you. So when I grew up, my father died when I was 2 months old. And so it was my mom, 2 older sisters, and me. And Mom took us to church every Sunday. I'm sitting in mass, you know, catechism on Saturday. Didn't go to a Catholic school because we didn't really have one out there where I grew up. But I will say this, and you look back, and then, you know, in your late teens, you kind of lose interest, in early 20s, and it's like you think you got it all figured out and know everything that's going on. And I will say, if it had not been for that foundation. And some of those, the golden rule and then some, that was, I was taught at an early age, and it didn't mean as much back then as it does now, even. But I guess I can see it better in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
That faith and that foundation helped me immensely, like ways I didn't know then, but I know now. Just simple stuff, keeping you out of trouble. You're able to land in any workplace and, respect others, and you hope they respect you, and you work it so they respect you. And that it's funny you bring that up now, because it wasn't all that long ago. And I would say in the past couple of weeks, I was thinking about all that. And it's like, my God, that all started with me going to church on Sundays and learning these values. Not that my mom, and not that you can't get it somewhere else, you can, but believe me, that kept me on a path that kept me out of trouble, and I guess put me in situations where there were opportunities to do some fun things and productive things in life. And while my path probably wasn't the most productive for society or whatever, I guess it serves a purpose as kind of an escape, and people, can go to work and come home and then get all their sports in 2.5 minutes, whatever. So it did serve that purpose, but yeah, there's no question that those, I almost call them guardrails, helped me along the way.
What's really neat, David Fulcher, and I know you're going to, not long ago, we had Anthony Munoz on the show. And I remember I didn't know this about Anthony. I wasn't as close as David obviously is to him. And he never even met his father. His father was incarcerated and went on. And it's just really interesting to see. And I think we can all say what a phenomenal human being Anthony Munoz is. And you're from that same cloth. And I sit here, and when those of you who talk about these types of things, my father was my best friend. There's no way I'm sitting on this show with David, having the time of my life, sharing wonderful people with the world, if my father wasn't my father. So for those of you and Anthony Munoz and anyone else who went on to be successful in life, who didn't have that fatherly influence, I tip my hat to you, because I don't know where I would be without mine.
Yeah, and it's my mom too. I mean, my mom, I don't know how she did it. We look back now and think, here's this 31, 32-year-old woman, and her husband just drops dead, and she just had her third child, and it's like,
wow,
her life was like,
and
I'll tell you how she did it. She did it with, church and faith, and good people at that church helping her through that time when I didn't know. I'm 2 months old. I wasn't aware of anything. And that's probably how, she got through it. But, we lost her a couple years ago. But boy, she had a hell of a run. She was 97 and never got married.
You can't get mad at that, man. You cannot get mad at that.
Yeah. No, you can't. You can't. That's just it's a great run. And yeah, she never got married again. She said she never found someone she liked as much as my dad. So that's how it all went down.
And my second part of the question, and we'll close it out if David's got something else. We all get old at some time. I just turned 60. You guys are a little bit older than I am. But was it you that walked away? Was it the station that said, George, we're tired, we're bringing in a relief pitcher?
Well, I will say they did not do that. They were very, very good to me. Very good. They told me whenever, if I wanted another contract, do it. I ran out of gas. It's a young man's business. And even more so now than it was, staffing has been cut back, and and we're sitting here talking through these computers and stuff, and it's funny how that changed the business too. So it went from having to have a separate guy edit video. I could just do it on the computer at my desk.
Yeah.
Well, I could, instead of having somebody make your graphics, I could do that at my computer sitting at my desk. I could make graphics. I could make the lower third supers. I could make all this. All of a sudden, not only were you able to do it, you were kind of expected to do it. And it was just a
Yeah.
lot of work for an old man. And it's
Sure.
like, I remember one day, I'm like, I thought I'd work till I'm 70. And it's like, maybe that's not such a good idea. And then the other part is too, you're around, there's friends of yours that retire and stuff. And they're like, hey man, you ain't gonna believe this stuff. And so you're like, oh, it's like, do I need to do? And so and then I've got, you know, you got the grandkids and you're still missing stuff. And it's like, I'm a 65-year-old man. Should I be working Christmas Day when I have grandkids? No. The answer is no. So that figured into it big time. Was, I was still, and I loved the stuff and the job and going to the playoff games and the recent playoff games with the Bengals, and it's all been fun. And you get to go on these trips for sporting events, and all that was still great. But the whole life balance thing was getting out of balance, or had been out of balance, and it was kind of time to make a correction.
Yeah.
I have two final questions for you. One of them is a mutual friend of the three of us. Yeah, you talked about your closeness with certain people. What about one Seg Dennison?
Mhm.
Oh my God. I go back to Seg. Seg was an intern when I was an intern. And I had to go down.
Way.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. Now Seg was at 700.
Yeah.
Seg was working at 700. I had to go down. Bob Trumpy had interviewed someone. Something had happened. Anyway, I go down. They were downtown then. And I go down and I have to see Trumpy to get this tape from him. And Trumpy introduces me to this guy sitting over here. Hey, he's an intern too. And Trump was great. And he introduced me. Seg probably doesn't remember that, but Seg's sitting over.
Seg remembers everything, and he will tell you everything that he
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Seg, but yeah, I met him, and then a couple other times I had to go down. We had to interview Trumpy for something once. So I saw Seg back then, and we used to every year, WLWT, we'd go up for the Indy 500 practice or something, and Seg would always try to time it up, and then he would ride up with us, and we got to be good friends that way. And then just seeing him everywhere, he's at the Reds games every night, and we just always had a fun relationship where we pretty much, but we've had a great time. Seg's good.
Question for you, George. My last quick question. Over the weekend, David and I haven't had a chance to discuss this because his birthday weekend was a blur. It was a blur for me, and it wasn't my weekend. I can't even imagine what it was like for David. But over the weekend, Tony Bennett, one of the classiest coaches in America, period, he stepped down from being the coach of the Virginia Cavalier basketball team. He's one of the most successful, classy coaches. And without saying a ton, he just said, I can't do the NIL, the portal has changed college athletics so much. I'm gonna step back. You covered sports for 36 years. Have you seen anything over that time that is going to change the fabric of college sports more than what's happening now?
I don't think so, and I don't know how any coach deals with it. And your roster is nothing but free agents every year.
Yeah.
Basically. The way it's running right now,
Wow.
every year. And so I don't know how you keep it together. And Bennett in that interview a couple weeks ago, where no one knew where this came from, now we do, where he was asked about how long he wanted to coach or whatever. And he started talking about Jay Wright and Coach K and even Nick Saban, walking away from this. And, maybe Nick would have anyway, but, and maybe Coach K would have because of the health thing. But I think all that other stuff tipped it. And they're just like, yeah, I mean, the job was hard enough now, to the fact that I got to keep an eye on every player every day of the year. You can't do it.
Thank you
And
for
so, yeah, it's mass chaos, and it happened overnight. It's like, boom, the transfer portal, and oh, these kids can transfer and become eligible immediately, and then boom, oh, and by the way, they might go to the highest bidder because here's NIL, and it all happened so quickly that there was no. It seems like they could have rolled out a plan a little better than this. So I don't know where it's going. I have no idea where this is going to end up, but it's in a crazy spot right now, and I can see why someone like Tony Bennett would say, "Yeah, I don't want to do this."
But as you heard, Cooper Fulcher had an opinion. David, what was it?
Well, his opinion was this here. When you see, oh, hey, slow down. Daddy's talking. Daddy's talking. You know, when the thing that gets me about the portal and the IO money is I might get a junior coming from Arizona State to come to UC. But when he comes to my program, it's almost like another freshman because I don't know him. I've got to get used to him. He's got to change his thought process to my program. And then just as I get him ready to do it my way or UC's way, he goes to another school. And as a coach, I don't know how these coaches can just wake up one morning. I got George Vogel as my point guard. And the next morning, George Vogel now is at UK. And here comes David Coleman. And I'm thinking, well, I saw David play, but I really don't know what kind of person David is. I'm trying to mold David into a Bearcat, but David's really not a Bearcat. David's a Cavalier. He's a Sun Devil. He's another player. He'd been to 3 schools in 3 years. And I think as a coach, that's hard. That's almost like raising your kids. When you're raising your kids, you try to put a standard. You try to put a mark on your kid to be like you. But when your kid leaves and goes to 5 schools, he's really all 5 of those schools in one person, and you don't know what you're getting. So yeah, I can see coaches leaving and walking away, and these coaches are making money. But I think though the passion for a coach is to build relationships with a student athlete, to see that kid come back to you at university or high school and donate, maybe make it big, help out the school. But you know what? When I see interviews, and not even interviews, when a football game comes and they say the starting defense and the first player gets on there, David Fulcher, Fremont High School, California. Okay, wait a minute now. Didn't you go to college at Arizona State? Why are you not giving Arizona State any love, but you're giving your high school, or vice versa? And I think it's tough as a coach because you can't build camaraderie. You can't build a program with 5 new kids the next year. That's kind of tough.
It's very tough. And this is sad, but we're talking about this over the weekend, and it's like, then I had to think about it later. It's like, that never should have been a conversation before, but it's impressive that Wes Miller got 4 of his 5 starters to return this year. That's big for a basketball team now.
Yeah, it is.
3 or 4 starters return. In the past, you never thought about it. They were going to return.
And now they're going to compete. UC will compete with the rest of the league this year in basketball. I think UC is one of them sleepers that people better watch out, because I think those guys are there and they've worked together for last year and now they're coming back. He's going to have a powerhouse team.
Right. I would agree with that. And you know, that familiarity, you can't just snap your fingers and it's there. You got to build that over a couple of years. And a lot of teams aren't getting that chance. That doesn't mean they're not good, but they're certainly not as good as they could be if they've been together a while.
George, I have one final question. David, I'll turn it over to you. And George, this is out of left field just because we've been talking about so many things. I remember back to the one opening day, March shot, the stadium's full, absolutely gorgeous opening day. Looked like a summer day. And the umpire dies behind the thing. Now this didn't. I don't want this on the air that this happened. My memory has created a moment where she steps over that body and says, "Get this game going." I know that didn't happen, but what you covered that, correct?
Oh God, yeah.
In a quick summary, because we're almost done with the show. What was it like here's opening day, the promise of a new season, sold out stadium, poor gentleman dies right at the plate, and then I think chaos ensued.
Yes, it did, and I was right in the middle of that. I was behind home plate. We'd done a pregame show. I was glad that was over. I didn't see it happen. I was back behind home plate and then further back where the tunnel is, talking to one of the clubhouse guys, and we were just standing there shooting the breeze, and then you hear this gasp, the whole stadium, and it's like, what's going on? And he goes running up behind home plate, and then he comes back and he's like, McSherry's down. And it's like, what? And, they had an ambulance right there in the tunnel. They go running out with the bed on wheels. And I mean, all this is happening right in front of me. And it was crazy. And I'll never forget it. It was awful. And you're right. It went from opening day excitement to, oh, my God. And then all this stuff's going on. I see, Barry Larkin and some players come out and they're talking to people. And it's like, there's no way in the world they're really talking about this game continuing. And yeah, somebody was. There was, yes. She wanted the show to go on. And the players are like, we are not. Are you kidding me? There is no way. And so, yeah, there was some chaos there for about half hour to an hour.
George, good things happen to good people. And obviously you lived your life a certain way. You worked very hard. And there is no question that you were in your job at a time when this town and sports in general had some of the most amazing moments it'll ever have.
Yes.
Congratulations on being able to cover that in your career.
Oh, thank you. It was a blessing, no doubt about it. I mean, kind of hit the sweet spot. I was lucky, very lucky.
Well, you know what, man? I will tell you, George, thank you for your time hanging out with us on Bootleggers Music Group Radio and Overtime Life After the Spotlight. And I'm finally got it done. We've been texting back and forth and trying to find a perfect day. And obviously this was the perfect day, especially after a perfect weekend for the Cincinnati sports. UC beats up my alma mater, Arizona State. And then the Bengals, the Battle of Ohio, took care of the Browns yesterday. I was a little worried though, man. After that first half, I'm thinking, no offense. We got a kick return for a touchdown. What's going to happen? But our defense stepped up, made some things happen. And brother, I will see you around. I know you didn't get to my golf tournament this year, but if God is willing, hopefully we'll have you there next year, brother. And I've got another one, Unforgettables. We'll try to get you in both of them. But
okay.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate your time, man.
Anytime, David. You've always been a saint and a pleasure to deal with the minute you walked into Cincinnati, brother.
Appreciate you, man.
Now I got to deal with that ego right there. This is David with my
no, I'm telling you, he was a sweetheart from day one.
Yeah. I've heard the story. I know. Look at that cheesy grin on that 60-year-old face. This is David Coleman. Yes, I see that. Yeah. For those of you on a listening platform, his head is exploding with all the words, as it does every day. Again, David Coleman, David Fulcher, George Vogel, thank you for your time. Folks, you've been listening to Bootleggers Music Group Radio. The show is Overtime. Please download the app. Please visit the site. And we'll be with you next time. Thanks.
You've been listening to Overtime with NFL All-Pro David Fulcher and co-host, award-winning speaker David Coleman on the Bootleggers Music Group Radio. Be sure to catch all our shows and music by downloading our app at bootleggersmusicgroup.com. All content is published and owned by the Bootleggers Music Group, LLC, and Zasco Publishing, and may not be duplicated without prior written consent. Executive producer,